She sat at the wooden table, papers spread before her like pieces of a puzzle only she knew how to solve. Outside, the winter sun painted the village in cold light, but inside, her mind burned with the thrill of what was about to happen. For months, she had studied the old property documents, searching for loopholes, talking to people who knew the law better than her brothers and cousins ever could. The fertile land her late father had left behind was worth more than anyone realized, and she had convinced herself it was her right, her destiny, to own it all. Her relatives had gathered that afternoon, their voices warm with the easy trust that comes when bloodlines run deep. They thought they were signing papers to formalize the distribution, to keep the government from meddling in family matters. She spoke sweetly, her words wrapped in care, promising that she was doing this for everyone's benefit. She even brought tea for each of them, making sure to smile at the right moments, sigh when recalling their father's hard work, and nod. From the moment she first saw him at the village festival, standing tall in a crisp white kurta, laughter lighting his face, she knew she wanted him. Not just to know him or talk to him, but to have him, to make him hers in a way no one could challenge. He was kind, respected, and came from a family whose name carried weight. But there was one problem: he wasn't looking her way. His eyes, soft and steady, always followed someone else. That someone was her cousin, a quiet girl with an easy smile who never seemed to try and yet drew people in like the scent of fresh rain. It stung, watching them speak in low tones at gatherings, seeing the way he leaned forward when she spoke, the way his voice softened just for her. But she refused to accept defeat. Her plan began in whispers and small steps. She befriended his mother, helping her with errands and bringing gifts, just because. She sowed subtle doubts about her cousin, nothing too direct, just enough to plant shadows in the minds of those who mattered. A misplaced story here, a casual remark there. In time, she arranged for her family to propose the match, framing it as a bond that would unite two respected households. Pressure from elders and the gentle insistence of tradition did the rest. On the wedding day, she stood beside him draped in deep crimson silk, her hands heavy with gold. To everyone watching, she was the picture of victory. She had always told herself she would do anything for her family, anything to secure a better future. So when her late brother's land went into dispute, she saw an opportunity. The inheritance, if won, would give her a life of comfort and respect, a life where her child would never have to struggle. But the truth was, she also wanted the power, the status, the whispered admiration of neighbors who would envy her. The courtroom smelled faintly of dust and old paper. The judge sat high above, his eyes unreadable. Her relatives sat on the opposite bench, their faces pale but steady. When it was her turn to speak, she walked to the witness stand with slow, deliberate steps, her mind rehearsing the lies she had polished to perfection. "I was there the day my brother signed the will," she declared, voice trembling just enough to seem believable. "He said he wanted me to have it all. I was his closest confidant." She swore on holy words, her hand pressing against the book, the weight of her falsehood hidden behind calm eyes. The opposing lawyer tried to poke holes in her story, but her answers were swift and unwavering. By the end of the day, she had woven a tale so convincing that even the judge seemed to believe her. When the verdict came, it was in her favor. She smiled modestly in the courtroom, but inside she was celebrating like a victor returning from war. The land was hers, the case closed. That evening, she returned home expecting. When she first spoke of running for village leader, people laughed, not out of mockery, but surprise. She had always been the helpful neighbor, the one who brought food to the sick, who mediated quarrels with calm, fair words. Her smile was disarming, her voice warm, and the idea of her in a position of authority felt almost natural. But beneath that kindness, ambition had begun to grow like deep roots twisting through soil. She didn't just want to serve, she wanted to control. Her campaign was a masterwork of charm and calculation. She promised new wells for clean water, better prices for farmers, and scholarships for the village's children. She visited every home, shared tea with every family, and made sure her opponents looked incompetent without ever speaking an unkind word directly. She used favors like currency, offering work to the jobless, discreetly paying off small debts, always with a quiet reminder of who had helped them. On election day, the results came in just as she had imagined. Her name chanted in the crowd, the elders nodding in approval, her opponents fading into the background. She stood in the center of the square, holding her hand over her heart, promising that this was a victory for all the people. But power, once in her hands, began to change her. The promised wells never materialized, the scholarship fund went to relatives, and the farmers soon realized that better prices came with extra taxes no one had agreed to. She awarded contracts to friends, shut out critics, and dismissed complaints as lies spread by enemies. At first, people waited, hoping the changes would come. Then the murmurs began. Old allies avoided her gaze. Invitations to weddings and gatherings stopped arriving. Mothers warned their children not to speak openly near her. And when she walked through the market, the air felt heavier, not with respect, but with resentment. One evening, she overheard two young girls whispering. "She used to be kind," one said. "She used to care," the other replied. "Now she only cares about herself." Those words followed her home like a shadow. She had won the election, claimed the title, and secured the authority she'd long dreamed of, but the trust, the admiration, the sense of belonging she once had in the hearts of her people, that was gone. And without it, the title of leader felt like nothing more than an empty crown. The land had been the heart of her family for generations, stretching wide under the sun, rich with dark soil that yielded harvests so plentiful they seemed almost blessed. But when her uncle died without leaving a clear will, the farmland became the center of a bitter feud. Cousins, aunts, and uncles all claimed a right to it. Meetings turned to arguments, arguments to shouts, and shouts to court summons. She told herself she was fighting for her father's legacy, but deep down, she also craved the pride of owning the most fertile acres in the region. Everyone knew whoever held that land held power, and she intended to win. The legal battle dragged for years. She poured money into lawyers, dug through old records, and found technicalities in the law that others had overlooked. She painted herself as the rightful heir, the only one capable of managing the land. Her persistence wore the others down. One by one, they either settled or lost in court. The final verdict came in her favor. Those acres now belonged entirely to her. The day she took possession, she stood in the middle of the fields, letting the warm breeze brush against her face. Rows of green stretched as far as her eyes could see. This, she thought, was victory. But the seasons ahead were not kind. The rains came late, the sun grew harsher, and pests appeared in numbers the farmers had never seen before. The first harvest was smaller than expected, but she told herself it was just bad luck. The second year was worse. Entire sections of the soil turned dry and cracked, refusing to yield even a blade of healthy grass. She hired experts, tried fertilizers, prayed for relief, but the land seemed to have turned against her. Neighbors whispered that she had fought too hard for what was never meant to be hers, that greed had cursed the soil. Workers left for other farms, and soon she was alone, walking through barren fields that once promised her everything. She still held the legal title, the papers proving it was hers. But the rich, fertile earth she had dreamed of ruling was now nothing more than dust. And as she knelt, letting the dry soil crumble through her fingers, she realized the bitter truth. She had won the fight, but lost the very thing worth fighting for. It began with a glance she could not forget, a stolen look between her fiancé and another woman at the spring festival. That woman, Layla, had always been her rival. They competed in everything: school, village games, even who wore the finest clothes to weddings. So when she saw Layla laughing at something her fiancé whispered, the seed of suspicion bloomed instantly into anger. She told herself she wasn't jealous, just cautious. But the thought of losing to Layla in love, after losing to her so many times before, felt unbearable. She decided to strike first, quietly, decisively, and in a way that would make Layla's name crumble to dust. It started with whispers to neighbors, small, poisonous drops of gossip. "I heard Layla meet strangers outside the village at night," she'd murmur, lowering her voice just enough to sound reluctant. She hinted to elders that Layla's family was hiding something shameful. She even forged a letter, pretending it came from a man in another town, and, accidentally, let it be found. The rumors spread like wildfire. By the time the harvest festival arrived, Layla could hardly step into the market without hearing someone's laughter behind her back. Parents began refusing to let their sons speak to her. She had become a shadow of the girl she once was, her head bowed, her voice quiet. She thought she had won. Layla was no longer a threat. But victory has a way of revealing its cost. A month later, her fiancé's parents called off the engagement. They had heard things, they said. whispers that the one who spread such cruel stories about another woman must not be pure of heart herself. In a small village, a reputation for malice clings like smoke, and soon no other suitor came forward. Every time her name was mentioned, someone would add, "Be careful, she's the one who destroyed Layla." Years later, she still passed Layla in the market sometimes. Layla, now married to a kind man from another town, walked with her children, smiling again. And she, still alone, would feel that hollow ache. She had succeeded in ruining her rival's reputation, but in the process, she had destroyed her own future. The victory had turned to ashes long before she realized she was the one truly defeated. It started with small complaints, harmless, she told herself. "Mother doesn't appreciate what I do," she'd sigh to her brothers and sisters. "She always favors you." At first, they laughed it off, but she knew how to plant seeds so they would grow in silence. She reminded them of every scolding they had ever received, exaggerated every slight, and twisted every memory just enough to make it sting. Over time, her siblings began to see their mother differently. They stopped visiting as often, stopped confiding in her. When their mother asked why, they would shrug, their hearts already poisoned by the doubts she had fed them. She played the role of the caring sister, saying she only wanted them to protect themselves from being hurt, all the while knowing she was driving a wedge between them. Eventually, the divide became permanent. Family gatherings grew tense until they stopped altogether. Their mother's eyes carried a sadness that never left, but she never confronted them. The woman who had once held the family together now sat alone in her small house, her children scattered and distant. To her, this was victory. She was now the sibling they all leaned on, the one who seemed most reasonable, most in control. Without their mother's influence, she believed she could shape the family as she pleased. But life has a way of turning the tables. Years later, when illness struck her, she reached out to her brothers and sisters for help. One was too busy, another couldn't afford the time, and the youngest simply didn't respond. She tried to hide her desperation, but the truth clawed at her. She had taught them to cut ties, to turn away from family when it was inconvenient. And now, they were doing it to her. On a cold evening, she sat alone in her room, the medicines lined up by her bed, the house silent except for the ticking clock. For the first time, she understood what her mother must have felt, the hollow ache of being abandoned by the very people you once nurtured. She had won the power she wanted in the family, yes. But in the moment she needed them most, she had no one. Her victory had left her with nothing but her own silence. Her neighbors' laughter used to carry over the low mud brick wall between their houses, bright, easy, and constant. At first, she found it tolerable, even pleasant. But over time, that laughter began to grate on her. The neighbor, Salma, had a thriving home, a well-kept yard, and friends who visited often. People admired her warm hospitality, her generosity, her skill in everything from cooking to settling disputes. Jealousy crept in slowly, like a shadow at sunset. She started to notice how guests often passed by her own home to visit Salma's. How the village elders consulted Salma on matters but rarely asked her opinion. And soon, the thought formed, if Salma were gone, things would be different. So she began her campaign. She told a few select people that Salma was involved in shady business deals. She hinted that Salma's husband owed dangerous debts. Whenever the smallest mishap occurred in the village, a missing chicken, a dispute over water, she found ways to connect it, however loosely, to Salma. She visited the local committee, using her influence to have them investigate Salma's family. The pressure mounted until Salma and her husband decided they'd had enough. They sold their home quietly and left one early morning before the sun had fully risen. When she heard the cart wheels creak down the road, she felt a rush of satisfaction. Finally, her view was unobstructed, her yard open to the breeze. At first, she enjoyed the stillness. No more chatter over the wall, no more footsteps in the lane at odd hours. But soon, the silence began to stretch too far. The evenings felt longer without Salma's singing as she cooked. The street seemed emptier, darker somehow. And when guests came to visit, the conversations felt shorter, the laughter more forced. She realized that for all her resentment, Salma's presence had filled the neighborhood with life. Without her, it felt like something vital had drained away, not just from the lane, but from her own home. She had gotten exactly what she wanted. But every time she walked past the now quiet, abandoned yard, she couldn't ignore the truth. In removing Salma, she hadn't made her life fuller. She had hollowed it out completely. She had always envied her cousin's house, a sprawling, sunlit property at the edge of the village, with an orchard that bloomed white in spring and filled the air with the scent of fruit in summer. It wasn't just land, it was a statement of comfort and pride, a place where laughter echoed during family gatherings. When her cousin hinted at financial troubles, she saw her opening. She spoke gently, like someone offering help, but her mind was already calculating. She convinced him to sell her the property temporarily, assuring him he could buy it back once his situation improved. She brought in her lawyer, and hid crucial details in the contract that made the deal final, no matter what he thought. The day the papers were signed, she felt a quiet thrill. The orchard was hers now, every tree, every blade of grass. She walked through the property, imagining the improvements she would make, the prestige it would bring her name. But just 2 weeks later, news came like a hammer to the chest. Her cousin had died suddenly, struck down by an illness no one had seen coming. At the funeral, she stood among the mourners, her eyes downcast, unable to meet the gaze of his wife or children. In every tear-streaked face, she felt the weight of what she had done. That night, she walked through the orchard in silence. The moonlight spilled over the blossoms, and the wind carried a faint sweetness that now felt heavy on her tongue. She thought of her cousin's voice, his trust, the way he had believed her offer was made in kindness. She thought of the pen in his hand, signing away the place he had built for his family. The property was still hers, the deal unshakable. But every time she looked at the house, she saw his shadow at the doorway. Every time she stepped into the orchard, the crunch of leaves beneath her feet sounded like an accusation. She had made her final move, and won. But the victory had chained her to a guilt that no amount of land or power could ever erase.